This is your introduction video or instructional video for body paragraph 1. So if you look right here, body paragraph 1 is a compare paragraph about how each boy had a test that required courage. So you'll be comparing the fact that both Tamas and Jerry had to use courage to accomplish their test, their rite of passage. I will just remind you to please use your chart to assist you. This chart will be using the first two rows. So what I have highlighted right now, these first two rows will be used. This first row will be the top half of this paragraph, the first half of the paragraph, and this second row will be the second half of this paragraph, and it will make more sense as I explain. I'll also remind you that because we will be using quotes in our data points, that you should use this quotes review presentation that we went over to assist you in writing data points that use quotes and citations properly. But body paragraph 1, again, you're comparing the fact that both tests required courage. Your topic sentence is how you always start a body paragraph. I have provided a topic sentence for you here. I fully encourage you to write your own, but I'm also okay if you use mine. Mine says, in each story, both main characters have a test that requires courage to complete. That is the topic of this paragraph. Both boys had a test that required courage. Next, in all body paragraphs, we have a setup sentence, so that's where you're introducing what your first half of your paragraph is about. All of the paragraphs for this essay, all the body paragraphs for this essay will be split into two parts. So you'll have kind of a first half of your paragraph, an internal link in the middle, and then a second kind of topic or half of the paragraph that you're covering. So your setup sentence, you have a little fill in the blank sentence here. It says, the first reason why Tamas and Jerry must use courage is, and then it says, introduce point of comparison number 1. The topic that you will be using, your first point of comparison number 1, is that they had a lack of equipment and tools. They had minimal equipment, minimal tools to use to accomplish their test. That was the first row of the chart. So, this looks a little different, and I'll explain how to do this. We'll also be talking about this one in class, and as much as we can, whenever you're in class, we'll be doing this in class, but just in case, obviously you're watching this video. So you will, at first, always start with Tamas. That was the first story we read. So go back to your chart, and you need to write one of those sentences that we've been working on for the past few units here. Write a data point where you introduce a quote with your own context, then you have a quote, then you have a citation with the author's last name and a page number. So find a moment in the story where it talks about some sort of tool or some piece of equipment that Tamas used in his test. Then your warrant, you just need to answer the question that's typed here. How does your data show that he used courage in his test? So based on what you put here, based on the tools you mention, how does that prove he had to use courage? So if you talk about the spear and the shield, how does him using those things show that his test required courage? So just a sentence or two explaining. Then you'll have a transition, and that goes in the middle here. Just a single word, maybe a little phrase. In addition, similarly, also, building from that, whatever you want to use for a transition word, type it in here. And then you'll do the exact same thing for the Jerry side. Go back to your chart. What did you put for Jerry over here for lack of equipment and tools? Write a sentence where you have a context that builds into a quote with a citation, with that author's last name and page number. So maybe talk about the rocks or the goggles. You don't have to pick both either. Maybe just pick one of the tools. So maybe pick just the rocks, or maybe pick just the goggles. And then exact same thing, answer that question. How does what he had, his tools, his equipment, how does that prove that Jerry had to use courage? So then you will have your warrant, your overall warrant, rather. So this is a sentence that you need to build where you answer this little prompt. So explain how the data and warrants above show similarity. So explain how. Because of the lack of equipment that both Tamas and the lack of equipment that both Jerry had, it shows that these boys are similar in some sense, or that their tests were similar. Yes, so just about a sentence for this warrant. The warrant is really the part where you explain how this and this are similar. Then you have an internal link, so in addition to point of comparison number 1, however you want to word that, both boys, and then you need to introduce point of comparison number 2. So that's your risks. So maybe this could read, in addition to having limited equipment, both boys face severe risks during their tests. Then you will do the exact same thing, but this time with risks. Again, find a data point or find a moment from the story, build that into a data point that you write with your own words and the quote. How does your data point, how does this risk prove that Temas had to use courage in his test? Transition word, or little phrase here. Same exact thing for Jerry. What was a risk that Jerry had, and how does that risk prove that he had to use courage? Then, for your overall warrant, just like your first one, a sentence or two. This is where you need to say, how do the risks in both stories prove that the stories are similar? How does the idea that both boys had some pretty severe risks, how does that show similarity? Or what is similar about the risk that each boy had to face in their respective tests? Finally then, the last thing, I just need one sentence max, some sort of summary sentence where you wrap up the main ideas of this paragraph. Perhaps you could call back to the topic of the paragraph. So kind of just something to summarize the fact that both boys had to use courage to accomplish their tests. When you go to copy and paste this, I know it's a little weird, but you will do this first, then this, then your transition, then your Jerry stuff, then your overall warrant. Then you move to the internal link and then repeat the same steps. Temas data warrant, your transition, your Jerry data and warrant, and then your overall warrant. Finally, then you'll have your finishing line. So that is body paragraph 1, where you compare the fact that both boys had to use courage in their test.